You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Holt.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. We are at the Northwest Material Show here in Portland, Oregon. And one of the benefits of being on the ground is seeing old friends, meeting new friends, seeing all types of innovations taking place at the raw material level and at the development level. And we wrapped up recently one of our material summits, and one of the most interesting things that were coming out of it is new applications for material development. And one of those speakers is someone who's been in our industry for many, many years, has worked at many different brands, and some might call a shoe sage. I've got Stuart Jenkins with me here today, and Stuart is one of the top innovators in our industry, and not only in terms of thinking differently about how processes are done or creating new product types, but ultimately how brands screw up innovation. Am I right, Stuart? I mean, they kind of get in their own way sometimes.
I think sage is just a polite term for a guy that's failed a lot too.
Well, I try to be very diplomatic. So. But isn't it true though that failure and success are intertwined? Isn't it? I mean,
well, it is. I actually that's kind of a fun topic, but I think that most people look at risk backwards. People think about risking failure, but really, if they don't do anything, they will fail. It's
Sure.
guaranteed.
Sure.
And so if you risk something or try something, you might actually succeed. So what you really are talking about is risking success, not failure. And I don't think that's a turn of phrase or cute. But if you sit and do nothing, people say, well, that's not risky. Well, it is very risky,
Right.
because all of your competitors or some of your competitors are coming after you, and they will push by you if you do not change.
Well, I would say the same thing about the consumer. The consumer is constantly changing, right? And if you sit there and consumers know, they look at if it's the same product type, same colorway, they know. They're smart.
Well, it's people are in a stream of consciousness. They're in a stream of activity. They're in a stream of events. And to meet that moving stream, they're going to require different products at different times.
Right.
And so you have to move to be with them.
Right.
And innovation is essentially both the art of, and most importantly, the willingness to change yourself before somebody else disrupts you.
Wow. That's a good point. So let's talk a bit about your shoe story. We always like to ask how people got into the footwear business and the different brands you've worked with, and one in particular, it's super hot right now, but Hoka. And I know you were involved in one of the beginning stages of the brand, and Decker's kind of assuming that brand, and you can maybe share a bit about that too. But
well, that's a long time between starting and Hoka. And I'll try to tell this story quickly because I think it's interesting. I was in high school. I'm dyslexic. School was the next thing to torture for me, and I was trying to figure out a way to avoid college. And I was a distance runner, and I wanted to run across the United States and be the youngest guy to do that. I'd read a book by John Steinbeck called Travels with Charlie, where he circumnavigated the United States with his dog Charlie. And I wrote for sponsorships to become the youngest person to do that. And, of course, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And, I was 17 years old, so I couldn't get a beer sponsor. And don't drink beer anyway, but Kellogg's offered me all the Frosted Flakes I could eat. Nike offered me 30 pair of shoes, but nobody offered me money to do this.
Right.
And a friend of a friend of a friend said, hey, I have a friend who's an inventor, and he's working on a new shoe. So I wrote him. He writes back and says, my shoe won't make it across the street, let alone across the country. And he was a gentleman that lived in a place. I'm from Custer County, Nebraska, Broken Bow, Nebraska, if that helps you.
it doesn't.
No, yeah. Well, Broken Bow's not the end of the world, but you can sure as hell see it from that. But this guy was from a place called Pebble Beach, California.
Okay.
Which I had never heard of. And he had invented one-handled water faucets. Instead of two, one. and the pull-out spout. And he was working on this crazy idea in 1975, 76 called an air shoe. And people thought putting air in shoes was stupid. I still have an interview with a San Francisco TV station. Says, "Oh, what happens when your shoes get a flat? Do you have to go to the gas station and fill them up? What happens when you have a blowout? Ha ha ha!"
You just walk away. You just mic drop and walk out.
Well, this was before Nike, and then Nike did it another way. But that technology, after I went to 94 shoe companies with it, and they threw me out on my keister, which tells you what a great salesman I am. We licensed that to Reebok, and it became a big success. And when you're trying to sell something for 8 years to 94 different footwear companies, you sort of become known as the village dummy. And so, hi, I'm Stuart, the village dummy. And then when it sells millions of pairs, you become a genius. And other people want whatever you have.
Right.
But the long story short, Angel Martinez was the CEO of Deckers, and he invited me to join, commit the sin of corporate administration and head up innovation for them and really start that innovation practice at Deckers. Great brand, great location. They had UGG, Tevis, and UGG. And Angel said, I was showing him some stuff one time, and he said, "Well, you can do these little things all you want, but not with a threatening tone, but with certainly a serious one." He said, "But every once in a while, you have to move the needle around here." And with Hoka, this really talks about open innovation, being willing to listen, being close to your retailers. I got a call from one of the best running retailers in the world, Johnny Halverstad at the Boulder Running Company. And he said, "There's this crazy-looking shoe. It's got about a 2-inch thick midsole on it called Hoka." And he said, "I've just bought the first 300 or 400 pair they've ever made. I think they could use some support of a bigger brand. You guys should get involved." And he sent me a pair of shoes, and it was quite an experience. First of all, you had to go out at night and wear them because you didn't want to be seen in them. They were so ugly. And I gave a pair to my son, who was working at a grocery store in high school, and a kid came up to him the next day and said, "Hey, your sneakers are wearing sneakers." But the fact that Johnny Halverstad, this guy knew running. I mean, sub 4-minute miler, second in the Boston Marathon, footwear retailer for years and years and years.
Right.
When he called, you better answer the phone.
Right.
And then I met Nico Mermoud and Jean-Luc Diard, the founders. And, I mean, I love those guys. I mean, they are crazy in the most lovable way.
Yeah, what do you mean? Just innovation at the core?
Absolutely. Just free to think differently.
Yeah.
Unencumbered by trends or traditions, and they didn't do something a little different. They went to the extreme and said, what's the problem here? All of us who, I'm part of the problem. I've been in the footwear running space for years. Well, what was wrong? There wasn't enough cushioning. People were getting pounded. Oh, you got to quit running. You're getting old. Your knees hurt.
Your knees are yep.
Well, we invented all kinds of compounds and air shoes and gel shoes and flubber and fancy and whatever, but still people found running hard.
Right.
And so, now that I say it, you think, well, how dumb was I? What'd they say? Well, let's just put twice as much foam under the foot. It doesn't sound hard, does it?
Right, exactly.
But they also, and I don't ever want to speak for either of them, but what I learned was Jean-Luc said, "Stuart, don't incrementalize your way to change." He says, "Go to the extreme and work back. It's faster."
Wow.
And that innovation principle is something that I think a lot of companies could benefit from, because you just incremental little change. I mean,
just
how many
enough.
of these? Well,
just safe enough.
Just
right?
safe enough. And you never, it's like running at night. Driving stakes. Who knows if you're moving?
Right.
I mean, it's just, And he did that, but I said, well, how did you think about this? And he said, well, Stuart, everywhere in the world you want to go fast, there's suspension. When I get to the top of the mountain and I want to go fast on a mountain bike, I can go much faster on a mountain bike with suspension than without. When I get to the top of the mountain in a running shoe, I can't run downhill fast because there's not enough cushioning.
Right.
And so he just kept putting more cushioning on and more cushioning on. And most fundamentally, he realized that we were under cushioning the ball of the foot. And, but so that's one innovation, just making it bigger. What else did he do? He said, well, we're going to come out with the most expensive running shoe on the market, $175, on a brand that nobody's heard of.
It's like brand suicide right off the bat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Do it.
Why not?
And if I showed you a picture of those shoes, I mean, they look like they were, orange, white, and blue. Let me tell you, that didn't come out of the Trendsetter's Pantone book. It looked like, Bozo the Clown,
Right.
I mean, really.
Right.
But it wasn't because Jean-Luc and Nico were dumb. It was because they were smart. They wanted to make sure that their shoe looked like something
completely different.
Completely different. And everybody noticed it.
Everybody grabbed it and at least looked at it, right?
Right. And when I put it on Angel Martinez, our CEO's desk, he didn't even pick it up. He looks at it from across his desk and said one of the most insightful things that I can imagine. And it was so different than how everybody else reacted. He looks at it and he says, Stuart, I'll bet that shoe does what it looks like it does. I'll bet it's really cushioned.
So everybody else for what it was. As a value proposition.
Well, right. And let's think about how people have disrupted categories. When Teva sports sandals came out, they looked totally different than anything. Weird, man.
Right.
Crazy.
Right.
Goofy. Well, now what is that? It's an icon.
Right.
Well, when Chuck Taylor made the ankle-supported canvas high top in 1929 or thereabouts, sales guy in the Midwest for Converse, Chuck Taylor, it was completely disruptive. What is it now? It's an icon, but it looked goofy.
Right.
Oh, why would you lace a thing up? Ugg boots. Well, you can make all kinds of fun of Ugg you want. It looks like a potato sack or whatever. But it's disruptive.
Right.
And how many people entered the running space and said, well, my cushioning's better than your cushioning, and I've got a better designer than your designer, and I'm more on trend than you're on trend. And Hoka made this look that is now distinctive.
Right.
But they had technical insights. I'll never forget, Jean-Luc says, hey, Stuart, who are the fastest marathon runners in the world? And being an aficionado of running, and as my brother would say, Stuart, you're often wrong, but never in doubt. I said, well, of course, the Kenyans. He says, oh, no, Stuart. The wheelchair athletes beat the Kenyans by an hour. Why? They're rolling. So if you look at the bottom and the front portion of a Hoka, it has a rocker bottom on it.
That's interesting.
It looks exactly like the very bottom section of a tire or a bicycle wheel, because he didn't want you hitting and slapping and stopping and driving all that force through there.
So it rolls through. So the energy...
You don't stop.
Right.
And so, you put the idea of suspension with disruptive looks, with a rocker, and you make this shoe that's twice as thick as most shoes, but guess what? Lighter. So he put these two things together. Mostly, you think big, you think heavy.
Right.
So people would pick this thing up and about throw it through the ceiling because it was so damn light, And I asked Nico one time, I said, how'd you make it so light? And he says, well, we just took out all the heavy.
All the density, right?
Yeah. He just didn't put things that were heavy on it. Didn't put a big, thick outsole on it. Didn't put a bunch of rubber on it. And so they made a bigger shoe, far more cushioning, lighter. So they put these. It was like trails nuts.
It's almost like they create cognitive dissonance in the consumer's head where they got to buy it just to try it, right? Like it's so different and so not what you expect that you're almost like, I got to try this out.
Well, that's absolutely true. But first they had to create, I think, cognitive dissonance in their own head.
Yeah.
Why weren't the rest of us doing that?
Right.
Why weren't these companies that have tens of millions of dollars in innovation budget doing that?
Well, let's talk about that because I think, we've had you on in a couple of our summits, one recently at the Sourcing Summit in New York, where you gave a keynote lecture on innovation. How do you set up innovation in companies? And a lot of the talk was about the things that people get wrong. So as brands today, when we talk about, this is the innovation team, this is the innovation director, people pass on a lot of things, like you said. Yeah. People miss a lot of things inside the industry. What are people missing in terms of innovation that could make a meaningful difference?
I think first you have to believe that there are more smarter people outside your company than inside it. So the number one quality, I think, for an innovator is humility. And that humility has to express itself in the willingness and the time and the investment of time to look at new things from people you don't know, from places you don't know. Jean-Luc took inspiration from mountain bikes.
Right.
And so many of these companies treat themselves like a bank vault. They think everything that's good in the world or going to be good in the world about development will come from inside. And I look at Steve Jobs, and we all talk about Steve Jobs, and it gets cliche, so I hesitate to do it. But think about the iPod. The iPod was the 8th or 9th MP3 player on the market. Toshiba was so committed to the idea of these players, MP3 players.
Right.
They had 2 or 3 different versions on the market. But Jobs said, "Look, I have a vision. I want 1,000 songs in my pocket." So he saw a problem, and he had this vision of what he wanted. But he said, 1,000 songs in my pocket. Well, that defined size. Well, then what did they have to do? They had to find a disc that was the size of your pocket. So he went to Toshiba, I think it was, found a 3-inch disc. So Toshiba's selling MP3 players, not even using their own disc, because they were committed to 2 or 3 other ideas.
Right.
So he didn't invent the 3-inch disc. He found it. He didn't invent Gorilla Glass. He found it. He didn't invent the iPod. He found the MP3 player idea.
Right.
But he built these parameters and so everything about that MP3 player was technology that he didn't invent, but he innovated by putting it together, or his team did. He and Johnny Ives.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of confusion about the difference between innovation and invention. Invention is completely new stuff.
Right.
Innovation is taking what's around you and making something new out of it, or combining it in a new way. My simple example of that is somebody invented the pencil. And somebody invented the eraser.
Right.
An innovation was putting an eraser on a pencil.
Right.
And there's a lot of money to be made by innovating.
Right.
Jean-Luc didn't invent footwear, and Nico didn't invent footwear. They didn't invent running. But they took standard materials, EVA foam, and combined them in a unique way because they had a different vision.
Right.
And look at Hoka. I believe Hoka's a $250 million brand today. No other running brand in America has started at 0 and grown to $100 million in 40 years. Why? Because they were sitting around saying, well, I can... you like Nike? I can make mine better. You like Asics? I can be better.
So it was the same, just a little bit of difference here or there, but not much.
My gel's better than your Air. This is that. Same profile, same look. And I think the other thing that was courageous, and I've never asked Nico or Jean-Luc, but you got to remember that we really pushed or launched Hoka when barefoot running was the super big trend. And I remember getting a lot of internal static. Stuart, you're off trend. I said, well, hell, how can you be innovative and on trend? I mean, it's antithetical to, but, people had lost their, my major running brands had lost their mind going to barefoot. I mean, I guess I probably shouldn't name them, should I? But I mean, major running brands.
Right.
They went to completely minimal and minimalist running.
Just to capture the trend.
And then I would assume, and now that's all gone.
Right, but I would assume by shifting your focus on what your core product is and what you're trying to do, you probably lost years of innovation in that process because you went away from it and then you're coming back to it instead of building on that. Well,
you could say that, or maybe since they had no fixed principles, they weren't doing any. They were just followers. They weren't really innovating at all. They're just doing what everybody else was doing. It's like how in the hell did bell-bottom pants get popular in the 70s? Everybody's just calling each other and watching each other. And I mean, would you really wear that crap? I mean,
let's change up gears, because I remember during one of your speeches you said you can't call yourself an innovator or talk about innovation unless you do it yourself. So you've started a company that's focusing on solving serious challenges on sustainability, on wastewater, on a number of different things, as well as comfort cushion. And kind of this kind of thing where, and you're obviously going to explain it better than me because of what you're doing, but something that allows a global reach to create molds in a new way. So tell a little bit about your company and what you're doing, and explain what challenge you're trying to solve.
Well, I always say that all of my lessons started on the ranch back in Nebraska, right? And I remember it's a pretty conservative place. And my father that's what he was a cattle rancher.
Yeah.
And I came home from college, and I started teasing him. I said, hey, Dad, are you an environmentalist? Because, he was always watching topsoil and water runoff and dirt blowing. And I said, are you an environmentalist? And he looks at me, kind of tugs on his Stetson, and he says, Stuart, I'll tell you one thing. I've always found that good environmental practice is good business. He says, I don't need to let my water run off into the ditch and into the river, my fertilizer running into the ditch or the river, because I don't grow any crops in the river or the ditch. And so with this innovation, it is a great step forward for sustainability. Blue Maca is the name of our company. Blue Maca is, to my knowledge, the most sustainable foam on the planet. 85% of it can be recycled or sustainable. And that is the happy outcome of trying to solve a more fundamental problem. With footwear, the problem is tooling costs to make foam midsoles or molds the mold costs are $50,000. We can do that for $5,000 to $8,000, 85 to 90% less. So when a brand's spending $1 million on molds now, they're wasting $800,000 of it. That ought to even appeal to a financial type. And so, but when you start with steel tools, you've got to cut steel, slow, expensive. Then you have to put mold release in them, bad for the environment. Then you have to heat them up to 400 degrees, costly. Then you cool them down from 400 degrees with water.
Gallons of water, yeah?
1 gallon per pair. So every time you're wearing a running shoe, there's 1 gallon of wastewater in that sole. We use no steel, no heat, no mold release, no pressure, and no wastewater. And this allows us to make product. I wanted to make better product faster. And it also allows us to make sustainable product. But I think much of the focus that I have seen about innovation in foam, they focus on the foam.
Right.
And they keep going to the foam manufacturer and say, I want biofoam or whatever.
Right.
But the foam guys have to run that foam through this process of steel and so forth. So we said, why don't we change the process, and then it allows us either to use less foam or more recycled foam. But without changing the process, you're stuck with whatever the foam guys make.
Right.
And this may be a little bit of an aside. I think our industry in footwear, we've got a problem because a lot of people are talking about sustainability, but there are no standards.
Right.
And we're not doing a very good job of policing ourselves. I mean, so if I put 5% bio foam in my midsole, is it sustainable? I mean, if you needed to get on top of a building and it was 100 feet high and you had a 5-foot ladder, would you say you had a ladder to do the job? I mean, I guess it's better, but is it really effective? And so it's going to be interesting to see how we decide to do that. But I love the fact that not only can Blue Maca make foam that has 85% sustainable or recycled content, but that we're making it in a manufacturing process that's far cleaner. But when I start talking about manufacturing process, most consumers or a retailer, they just roll their eyes because they can't sell it.
Right.
And that's problematic.
Right.
Because you should. It should be my dad's thing, do the right thing. It's good for business, and it is good for business. Not wasting 80% of your money on tooling.
And where are you guys at now? Where are you in the process? Are you,
Yeah, I feel like I'm dancing with a chainsaw naked at night. I'm. It's a challenging system where I'm kind of putting my money where my mouth is. I'm building a production line. My initial production line will be in China, but as I think I've told you before, all of our production equipment for one production line would fit in one shipping container, and it's not very expensive. So we want to be able to continue to make production lines and move them or locate them close to manufacturing. So if somebody wants one in the United States, we can do that. One in Mexico, we can do that. One in the Dominican, we can do that. One in Africa, we could do that.
Right.
One in Portugal. So they're light, nimble, mobile, and essentially you just have to plug them in to your outlet, and you have almost all of the all you need. I mean, a little more than that.
Right. Well, that's amazing.
Well, people say, can that be true? Well, I'm going to find out in a few days. And, I'm betting that it is true. Then we have to scale it. But at this point, I give the industry credit. There have been a lot of people that have been willing to sort of come along and say, hey, we want to be early on this. We want to work with you.
Right.
And
well, that's good. You're not a full village idiot then, right? Just a half one?
Well, or at least I have company.
That's awesome. Well, at this point, I want to pivot and bring in Jasmine Pendergrass to do our famous fashion, footwear, and focus segment. And this is where Jasmine will talk about a trend that she's working on, and then a trend that's in the marketplace, and we'll get your input and we'll talk about it a bit. So what is on trend right now?
Okay, so I've been out in Portland for a little while. Got to talk to a lot of different people. We were talking about, like the most creative shoes. There was a guy who was saying that his brother only wore shoes that were customized by him, so nobody would have the shoes on. And I was like browsing the internet, and I seen these Marani banana sock boots, which look like not even a shoe almost. It looks like a boat at the bottom of it. It's very interesting. But it made me think, well, I don't really have any. I have shoes that are a little stand out, but would you just buy a pair of shoes just because they're like one of a kind, just to draw some attention to yourself?
Would I?
Yes.
Oh, hell yes.
Yes? Okay.
I think that's built into the DNA from runners from the 70s because my kids still laugh at me because, in the 70s, the running shoes were wild and outlandish and crazy. And so for me, a shoe that's loud and crazy and colorful
really?
takes me back to my youth. And, And, again, I got my fashion sense on the ranch in Nebraska, which means if I'm in fashion, it was sheer luck.
Well, I think as far as the trend, it's only going to continue because you got I know there's a guy in LA that will take shoes and break them apart and then reassemble them for people for sale, right?
Yeah.
So it's like breaking it down and creating something new, right?
Right, yeah.
But with whatever is around. And then you've got NFL players and all these guys constantly wearing cleats with some kind of almost every game there's some kind of new message or some new thing coming out. And I think that when you start seeing that on the field, it bleeds down in people's brains about what they could do something a little bit different. And I think Vans is on the forefront of doing this at a mass level because you're now able to take in, and Converse too, but you're now able to take in designs that you have yourself or something like that and take a white canvas and screen print something in stores.
Yeah.
Well,
a customized.
Well, with Blue Maca, I mean, our process means that you could put a printer in front of our production line and every shoe could have a unique image of your selection, and it's very inexpensive to do.
Yeah.
So you could either do mass customization or customization for a retailer, or every single shoe could be discrete, unique. And in our process of doing that, it's not that expensive. So it really makes, we're using the foam. In our process, you can use your foam midsole as a palette. And that's very difficult to do. Right now, they're designing a lot of these things on the uppers, where they have to hand do the midsole. And so we're allowing the designer and the footwear brands to use the midsole as a canvas,
like an element.
And I think that's going to be another one of our benefits.
Yeah. Look at that, the trend brought out.
Right.
Look at that.
Well, thanks for tossing up the sales pitch. Of course, I'll probably have to go to another 94 companies and get thrown out. But
that's all right. Well, Stuart, thanks so much for joining us today and participating in several of our summits. And I know we've talked about it, but we're going to work on some kind of innovation series, how you actually can look at innovation internally and not trip over your own feet.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I would love to work with you on some innovation podcasts. I do think that innovation is a business practice where many people think it's luck and hope.
Right. They think it's a light bulb and it's a muscle, right? You got to flex it, you got to work on it.
It is absolutely that. And I'd also like to thank the FDRA for what you're doing, particularly at this time with tariffs and trying to educate the consumers and perhaps educate a few politicians. That's kind of like trying to teach. Yeah, that's like trying to teach a pig to sing.
That's right.
Ineffective and annoying to everybody.
Exactly.
But, we're good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stuart. Folks, as always, this is Shoe and Show. We're covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, specifically on the business side of the industry, how our business models are changing and morphing due to consumers, due to new trends, styles, etc. But we want to hear from you. If you have topics that you want us to talk about or guests you'd like us to have us come on, drop us a line at shoeandshow.com. You can also find our entire catalog there, going back several years. But thank you for listening. And on behalf of our whole team here, until next time, Shoe In is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.